Well, I think the scale of the protests has taken the regime by surprise. Plus, there's also been a general strike. The movement hopes to create an economic seizure that makes it impossible for the regime to function or to project the image that it is business as usual. Young Myanmar people were among the earliest to rise up against the coup. Many of them entered adulthood during that hopeful decade of rapid liberalization. They tasted the freedoms possible under semi-civilian rule, but now they have to live with that kind of repression that their parents experienced as the military regime reinstates the old laws and even introduces new ones to suppress dissent. They feel that the coup has robbed them of their future. Now, the regime has become increasingly aggressive and violent. We are seeing more live bullets being used to disperse crowds and more people dying of shots to the heads, which indicates that snipers are being deployed. There have also been mass arrests, especially during curfew hours. Many people have been detained in undisclosed locations, and some of those who have been released after that bear injuries that indicate torture. The military has tried to portray these protesters as violent anarchists. So at this point, the protesters are largely peaceful. I think ultimately the military wants to be able to control Myanmar politics, even if it's from the back seats. The 2008 constitution, drafted by the previous junta, gave the military control of three key ministries and guaranteed it 25% of all seats in parliament. The idea was that these seats could be combined with the seats won by its proxy political party or parties for it to continue to exert its authority even in the legislature. So this did not pan out in the 2015 and 2020 elections. Voters gave the National League for Democracy such big victories that it won a supermajority in parliament. The military regime has indicated that it wants to change the electoral system from first past the post to proportional representation. Now, by itself, proportional representation is a good idea because it would give more voices to ethnic minorities who felt their wishes were ignored by the Burma majority under the NLD government. But having proportional representation under the current constitution would skew the balance towards the military. The elected NLD lawmakers have set up this committee representing Pidong Suluto to represent the parliament that the military prevented from convening. This CRPH has appointed acting ministers and envoys. It is also trying to get international recognition as the rightful government of Myanmar. The problem is that CRPH is dominated by the NLD, which makes ethnic minority groups wonder if it might have the same majoritarian tendencies as the NLD. So to assuage these concerns, the CRPH has declared that it wants to abolish the 2008 constitution and create a new one based on federalism. Some ethnic minority parties have tried to keep their options open. The Arakan National Party, which is active in Rakhine State, took part in a meeting convened by the new election commission, which was appointed by the regime. But the situation is very dynamic, and ultimately the parties will have to follow the sentiments of their constituents or risk a major backlash. It's becoming clear that the regime intends to rule these leaders out of politics through criminal convictions. In the case of Aung San Suu Kyi, she was initially accused of possessing illegal walkie-talkies, but over the past few weeks, she has been charged with more serious offenses, including breaching a communications law and another law related to incitement. There could be more charges brought against her in the coming weeks. Meanwhile, the regime has said it plans to file corruption cases against senior members of Ms. Suu Kyi's government soon. At this point, ASEAN can only apply diplomatic pressure. It has no powers beyond that, as it abides by a policy of non-interference in the domestic affairs of member states. and it makes decisions by consensus. However, it has been able to keep open communication channels with the regime in hope of getting it to de-escalate the situation. ASEAN has offered to facilitate dialogue among all the stakeholders in Myanmar, but ultimately ASEAN can only do so if Myanmar's military gives its consent. And the military will only give its consent if it feels that ASEAN's involvement can protect its interests somehow. This scenario, of course, is unacceptable to anti-coup protesters within Myanmar. The Western countries, like the United States, are expanding the sanctions to target not just the senior leaders in Myanmar's military, but also the conglomerates that help to fund the military. So that will limit its space to maneuver. But bear in mind that Myanmar's top trading partners are not in the West, but in countries like China, Thailand, and Japan. So there's still a limit to what these sanctions can do. In the longer run, I think the momentum will come from the social pressure on foreign companies to cease their business dealings with Myanmar's military. Local opinion has now become a very powerful factor within Myanmar. And businesses that are seen to be working with the military now face boycotts. So that makes it a very tricky environment for foreign investors. It will also be very tricky for governments that were giving aid to the Myanmar government before the coup, since it is not clear now where this aid will be directed to under the regime. One option is to direct the aid to NGOs, but these groups are likely to be under greater surveillance now.